I think you ought to, how you put music with all this.
Yeah,
I think when you and I do one together, you ought to pick a music lineup that out of the Van Nuys top 10.
the Van Nuys top 10,
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
like porn music.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that laugh is the unmistakable Chad Fortenberry. Welcome back to the show, man.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me today.
Well, it's an interesting time, isn't it?
Yeah, oh my gosh, you're telling me.
But you've been flying more than anybody I know during this time. So what's going on with that?
Well, when this thing whole started happening, I guess we heard about it, and then before it got real serious, which kind of in Marchish, it kind of started to take shape with some things and some cases coming along, and then in April, we were it just so happened getting some stuff done with our airplanes, and so April 6th through the 24th, I went to a Citation 10 initial class, and then after that on the 25th. I flew from April 25th. Then very next day, I got out of class all the way to May 25th. I think I flew 73 hours during that period of time. Most of that was teaching in the single engine turboprops, about 95% of it actually, and a lot of it is attributed to people having that are running their own businesses that own these airplanes, doing either early recurrence, having the time to do it, and with the slowdown and things like that, just not being 24/7 at the business end, and then having the time to go out and do the pleasure flying and work on stuff and get more proficient, et cetera, et cetera.
So I guess that begs the question then. You went through training at a simulator center. What was that like?
Well, it was actually pretty cool, in a way. If you can take out, of course, we all want things to be normal, but if they weren't going to be normal, driving from my house to the other side of DFW Airport, I live in Garland, Texas, and then driving to the other side of DFW, which would be the west side from where I live, that usually takes me about an hour and 10 minutes to an hour 15, probably in normal everyday non-COVID traffic. But during this time, it took me about, I'd say, 35 minutes to get there, and it was absolutely, amazing to get there and back. So the commute was cut down drastically. The, you know, the training center was great. The social distancing was there. There was three of us in class. They had us spread out. They offered up everything they could. Sanitizer wipes, coffee stations that were spread out throughout the facility, so everybody wasn't gathered around one coffee station. Of course, the cafeteria was shut down, but that didn't stop them. What they did was they just delivered things in carts to the classrooms. So in the morning, you'd get a mid-morning snack, and they'd deliver that. Then they'd bring you lunch. They'd deliver that in the classroom. Then they'd deliver an afternoon snack in the classroom. So all throughout ground school, everybody was taken care of, and they were really gracious about it. They had soft drinks, waters, whatever you wanted to drink. You did not feel like anything was abnormal except for the quantity of people, and that was it.
Interesting. So you felt pretty comfortable and confident there the whole time?
Oh, absolutely.
Cool. Well, now where you're at in Dallas is unfortunately just recently in the last week or so become a little bit of a hot spot. How are you feeling now?
I feel good about it. I've always been kind of a germaphobe, to be honest. So for the past several years, and commuting on the airlines and things like that, I'm the guy that always got made fun of because I have that Purell hand sanitizer that wraps around your cargo short belt loop or whatever, and I always travel with that, and always travel with some of those wet one wipes and things. So when I'm not, flying one of the airplanes and I'm getting back from one city to the next on American or whatever, well, heck, everybody's like, hey, Chad's got sanitizer and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And then it's the same way when I go to sporting events. My fiance always makes fun of me, and she's always like, you're such a nerd and blah, 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 blah. Well, I tell you what, all I had to do was throw a mask on and my behavior never changed. So, if that's the worst thing I have to do, I think that that's definitely a plus. And so, with this going on, and the confidence in this being a hotspot, I just have to do what I know to do to be respectful for everybody, and that's just wash my hands, don't touch my face, and wear a mask.
Yeah, I like how you said that. I mean, it's for those of us that are kind of that way already. It's this isn't new news. Like I was surprised at the beginning of this how many people really need to be told that you like need to wash your hands, which I kind of thought was surprising. But apparently, this has kind of brought that to the forefront for people. But yeah, for people like you and me, it's slap on a mask and that's it. But you're right. It's unfortunate that it's become so politicized. But at least right now, it's like you said, it's out of respect for other people and respectful behavior and just being responsible in general. It's not about anything other than that, just basic respect. And, everybody has their own situation. So the other thing that's been interesting that's been going on here is we just kind of touched back on the Boeing situation. And as of yesterday, actually, the 737 MAX just started flying again. And you and I had quite a few little exchanges there about what's going on. And you were telling me about the Challenger and the 10 and all the other airplanes you have that you fly, with reference to angle of attack indicators and how they're different than what Boeing did. And I like how in every other aircraft that we were talking about, the AOA indicators are just a known failure point, and everybody knows it. And because of that, the manufacturers have kept them unconnected. They're completely separate. And that way you can do good old fashioned cross checking or whatever. But somehow that escaped the software engineering over at the Boeing contractors. So before we get too deep into the other stuff we're going to talk about, give me a little overview of how the Challenger is and the 10 versus that.
Well, yeah, and you can throw other airplanes in there too. One of the main ones, and you and I didn't talk about it, but the 680 Citation, the Sovereign, another situation where you have an unconnected AOA, and that's actually the airplane I learned how to fly an AOA in. The thing about it is that it's good information, but when I guess you could say improperly, uh, the input is improper, and if the input is improper, and it happens a lot with AOAs, you don't really get reliable information unless you have a cross check between the AOAs and a cross check between the two sides. So AOAs are known for failures. When they're working, they're fabulous. And I'll give you a good example of a AOA and a Citation Sovereign. And this is just because it goes back to the time when I was learning how to fly with an AOA and use one properly. I was fortunate enough going through initial in that airplane that my sim partner Kelly, super, super, super nice guy, is coming out of an Encore Plus. And of course, I had about 100 hours in the airplane, and he actually had zero. So he was coming in, cold turkey. But I had my SIC, and he was using the AOA. And he said, "Have you ever used an AOA?" And I said, "Well, no, I've never used an AOA." He says, "Well, great. I'm going to teach you how to use an AOA." One of the cool things about the AOA and the 680, and other airplanes are this way too, but the 680 in specific, is that point 0.6 on the AOA is best glide in any configuration. And if you're, it doesn't matter what you're in, full clean, gear down and clean, flap 7 and gear down, or whatever that may be. If you just look at the AOA and pitch for point 0.6, that's going to be best glide. So if you happen to lose both engines, or happen to be in a situation where that comes into play, that point 0.6 on the AOA, best glide in any configuration, that is a big help, because you can just fly that AOA and use your pitch accordingly and just watch that needle. And it's actually very easy to do. So that's just an interesting fact about the one way we can use AOAs in aviation. Learning how to use an AOA and learning how to fly with an AOA is great when they're working. But when they're not working, it's kind of like, how you have primary instruments and secondary instruments. So you have primary instruments for pitch, you have secondary instruments for pitch. You got primary instruments for bank and secondary instruments for bank. Well, an AOA is kind of like one of those things. It's like a secondary instrument, for angle of attack or pitch, you could say. And if used as a primary instrument, and my fear is that that's kind of what, and I'm putting words, of course, in a plane's mouth I don't know much about. But that's kind of what Boeing kind of did, I think, with the 7.3, is they turned around and said, "We'll make it a primary instrument for pitch." Well, you can't make a secondary indicator primary and have success.
Sure. And in addition, it was an option to have two of them, I think, and there wasn't even an option for a mismatch or a disagree either. So that if one person doesn't catch it quick enough, there's no alert or anything to be like, "Hey, these two are out of whack. Maybe you should take a look at it." It's just that was a paid option that I think a lot of people just didn't go for.
Well, you got to understand this. Airlines, let me tell you, if you want a shoestring budget and you want to know people that'll do something on the cheap, they're going to get away with the least amount of whatever they can. So if only one was required, that's all they're going to pay for, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of like airlines. If you get an airline FMS, they're only paying for the airports that they're approved for. They don't have the whole nation in their, domestically, even in the U.S., the domestic airlines don't even have the whole country in their FMS box. So if they had to go to an airport for an emergency that's not approved, it may not even be there. They may just be looking at a landing strip. So of course they're not going to buy options.
Of course, and we're talking about in the United States, and I mean these crashes happen in places where I'm going to say the budget was lower, to put it
Oh,
nicely.
well, definitely, and not only is it lower, it's lower for pilots.
Yeah,
Because you've got the guy in the left seat that's got 7,000 hours maybe, and the guy in the right seat's got about under 1,000 a lot of times. So you've got a lack of experience, and then you've got a lack of overall experience in the airplane.
yeah,
So it's there's a lot of contributing factors to what went on. I think a lot of the U.S. airplanes had the problem, and they were just experienced enough to be able to turn the system off and fly the airplane versus just trying to keep going.
sure. Well, and then of course we had the crux of the whole situation was nobody even knew it was there in the first place.
Right. You had that going on. Then you had the one. I think there was one where wasn't one of them. They wrote up the airplane before the night before because they had a problem, and then the next crew the next day got in it and went ahead and flew it.
Yeah, yeah, excellent procedure.
Oh yeah, like a pro pilot, right? So if you push a button and it doesn't work, push it again and push it harder.
That's right, and then just leave it overnight. Don't tell the next crew and let them figure it out too.
Right.
All right. Well, the last time you were on the show, rant over, I guess, right? But, the last time you were on the show, we did a pretty fun discussion of, fun times we've had together based on the logbook and, a lot of the way that our careers have progressed since. And the episode was really well received. And I was really happy about that because a lot of times when it's just two guys kind of BSing about stuff they've done before, that unfortunately can be one of the most irritating kinds of conversations to listen to for those who aren't there. But, the episode did really well, and we talked about a lot of good stuff. And I'm really glad to have you back on the show because today we've got a lot of sort of harder topics to talk about. Not so much the fun stuff, but really the technical meat and potatoes that I'm really glad to have you as an instructor and as an experienced pilot sort of talking about. And you sent me a list of things that we should probably talk about, and I think it's perfect. So today's episode, sort of in contrast to the last time, is going to be just a lot more technical. So I hope everyone's ready to kind of nerd out and get down with this because this is going to be a really good talk. You ready to go, man?
I'm ready.
Okay. So the first topic I think that we should discuss, because this is something that I'll tell you about how I see it each day at my airport, which is primarily in training. But no matter where you see it, it can go well or it can go really not well. And that's go around procedures. Not having it committed to memory, not being able to execute it as a memory items, and frankly, not being ready for it in the first place. So what are you seeing out there when it comes to this type of issue?
Well, here's what I see, in the go around environment, and I've noticed over the past few years is coming through the CFI situation and getting into more technically, you could say, more substantial airplanes. Let's put it that way. Anytime an airplane hops up in substantiality, you're going to have a go around procedure that becomes, well, you could say, increasingly more difficult. But what you want to really say is it becomes increasingly more important to have it down correctly. So a lot of the things that you can get away with in a Skyhawk on a go around, you can't get away with in something like a TBM, and have it go as well as you could in something like a Skyhawk. So as your substantiality of the aircraft increases, the importance of having the procedure down definitely increases along with the airplane, if not exponentially. Important becomes, dire important, especially when you're dealing with something like a retractable gear airplane, an airplane that when you push up the power, it takes, 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, and then now we're spooling up. And then when you get into the turbojet situation, you have an even longer period of time. A lot of times when you add power before you actually receive the power that you're added, so it becomes even more important at that point to have the go around procedure just down pat.
Absolutely. One fun sort of exception to that, I guess we could call it, would be my favorite, the M600 Meridian, because I think the go around procedure in there is you click the go around button.
Yeah, well, if the autopilot is engaged, you still have to do a number of things in the airplane, and you still have to manage it. And part of the issues with that I see with go arounds when in the teaching environment, you also see it sometimes in the professional environment, but mainly in the teaching environment. And when you have the owner flown environment, what you get is you have a series of procedures that aren't paid attention to, and go around button, power maximum allowable pitch into the flight director flaps approach, positive rate, gear up, go into your flight guidance panel, get it set up how you need, but just for the purposes of nav, vertical speed, autopilot, and then 125 flaps up or 130 flaps up, whatever you're dealing with. If you don't have those things down real smooth, that go around procedure turns into a cluster. But what you have is you have somebody that goes down and expects this to be working or that to be working, or they've clicked off the autopilot to hand fly the last segment of the approach, which is great. If that's what you're doing, that's fantastic. And then you hit the go around button, and that's it. And a lot of times, what people do is they hit the go around button, and they don't get all the power in, and they turn around. The first thing they do is reach for the landing gear, and the second thing they do is go for the flaps. Well, they don't have all the power in. You're low to the ground, and now you're sinking. So now your gear's coming up. You're sinking. Your power's not in. So there's a whole series of issues that are going on there. And if you went down to the minimums on something like an ILS standard 200 feet, well, now you've got a real problem on your hands.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me tell you what it looks like from the tower, at least where I'm at, where I see a lot of training. All those issues, 100% agree with, and I'm also going to add, I will see a lot of times a pilot will go around, and sometimes you can't tell if they're a student or if they're just rented a plane from the club or whatever, but they'll go around for whatever reason. And the first thing I hear is that power comes on so fast that if that were anything other than a piston engine, like if it was a turboprop, you would have just destroyed your reduction gearbox and over torqued the thing. It happens so fast that they just slam in the power as opposed to a rapid yet still smooth application. And in some of the old carbureted aircraft, that could actually be a quick way to kill the engine inadvertently, which would, of course, be a huge disaster in a number of levels. And then right after the quick application of power, the first thing they reach for instead of the flaps or the gear is the microphone switch. And they feel as if it's very, very important to tell the tower that they're going around. And I get it, and I appreciate that you want to tell me that as quickly as possible. However, I can see you. You just did it right in front of my face, like 2,000 feet in front of me. So I can see it, I can hear it, and we have to sort of get back to the old mantra of aviate, navigate, communicate, right? So communicate is the last thing. So unless there was some major collision about to happen, which there's probably not right over the runway with you going around, that's like your last priority. And then thirdly, the next thing I'll see is going straight for that flap lever. And I'm usually talking in the fixed gear airplanes here, but I saw one the other day where the power came in real fast, engine backfired, microphone keys up, tower I'm going around, and then I watched the flaps go up, and right as the airplane started climbing, it just started sinking right back down again. He probably lost almost 100 feet as the flaps all came out at the same second. And I'm hoping that that was a training flight, and I'm hoping that they had a nice, pleasant, yet very real discussion in the debriefing about how that all went. But you can tell even from the outside if somebody doesn't have the procedure committed to memory, and you can just watch it all day long if you sit with me in the tower, how bad it could go if things don't go right.
Brandon, you have brought up an extremely important point there with the ANC, aviate, navigate, communicate. And I cannot tell you how many times during a training session with a client, during a training session with a couple guys that I've flown with forever, because we all need constant reminders. Everybody goes for that mic button. Everybody goes for that mic button. Everybody goes for that mic button. And I see it all day long. And I'm like, folks, it's aviate, navigate. You fly the airplane. The very last thing you do is communicate, because you can't talk if you go into the ground. I mean, you're not going to have the opportunity to do. Also, you need to get the plane under control and make sure you're not going to get violated at the same time you're trying to grab that microphone. Because what happens is, like I said, they'll put the power in, they'll do this and that. But when they put the power in, it's not all the way. And you talk about smooth application of power and things like that, and that's extremely important. But then we get it in, but we get it in halfway, and now we're reaching for that mic button. So I see that same thing going on from inside the airplane that you see from outside the airplane. And it definitely affects the entire procedure. One thing I wish we could do in airplane, I would not do this in airplane, but we do this in the simulator environment. In the simulator environment, when we're in the level D sims and we're in training, I don't care what airplane it is. It could be the King Air 350. It could be the Citation Sovereign, the 10, the Challenger, that we've all done it. And this is how we train in it. And what they'll do is we'll do a go around, 2 engine go around. And the sim instructor will be in the back. And the sim instructor will say, okay. And we all get a shot at it. So we get to go from the right seat and the left seat. And they'll say what we're going to do. Well, and we know it's coming, but we know to practice it just because this is why you get your procedures down. And they'll say you do not go around until I tell you to go around on this one. So they'll put it down at mins. The ceiling will be you'll have to take your additional 100 feet, so you'll go all the way down to like 100 feet AGL, and then you'll commit to landing. And when you commit to landing, they'll pop the fuel truck out there real fast or put something on the runway for you that's down the field that you can see or whatever. And then they'll tell you to go around at 50 feet. And when you go around at 50 feet, your mains will bounce off the runway and you'll go around. And that teaches you don't go for that gear until you have positive rates. You get your power maximum, go around button, power maximum allowable, pitch into the flight director, flaps approach or flaps to where they need to go, depending on what airplane you're flying. And then you got to wait for positive rate and gear up. And in the process, you just, your mains touch and then you go.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually reminds me of back in my 727 simulator days. We did the training for the Cat 2 authorizations, and it was incredible because you read the reg and it says that they have to do that too. You put you in a position where during the go around, it's likely that the main wheels will contact the ground. And exactly as you said, we'd get down to minimums, runway in sight, and you've committed yourself mentally to landing, and then he would just fog the whole thing out. You lose sight of the runway, and you have to go around. And then, of course, as you spool up 3 JT8Ds, I think those are dash 14s. I mean, that's not 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000. I mean, you get to about 6, 7, 8 before those things are putting out power, and the mains would, in fact, touch the ground, and you saw it, and then you lost it, but that's exactly it. So you waited for the power to come on, you pitched up into the flight director, and you just let it come back off the runway. And then, of course, you had a first officer who's going to handle a lot of the handiwork for you, like the flap retraction on the schedule, the gear, and so forth. But you still have to call it. And it very much trains you to don't go for the gear handle, don't go for the flap handle, go straight for the throttle, control the pitch. It will fly again. I mean, it has plenty of power to do so, even full dirty, even having contact to the ground. And then once it is flying, continue to fly, then set up the navigation, the speed mode, the heading bug, whatever this approach procedure is, then you're going to call it. But what a lot of people forget is that in air traffic, we're at the airport. Like, I can see you. And even if it's a big airport, controllers are watching that. I mean, I don't know what you think my job is, but I mean, we're watching that aircraft touching down and everything else we're doing. And if it goes around, I'm not even allowed to talk to you till you're out of a critical phase of flight again anyway. So even if you do call the go around first, I'm not even probably going to respond unless I really, really, really need to tell you something. And chances are I don't.
Exactly, because it's rare that you're actually going to do that and be on fire. So why would you say anything?
Yeah, and even if you were on fire, well, guess what? I can probably see that too, and I'm going to be doing my darndest job to get everyone out of your way, and I'm just going to expect that you're going to come back and land on some runway. I mean, at this point, you're the priority, whether you've said it or not.
Exactly.
Okay, well, cool. So now let's move into the ATIS. This is a fun one. I don't know why, but there is so much misinformation and so much sort of fake knowledge I think that people have made up or tried to figure out about the ATIS. But you say people sort of overthinking the ATIS a lot. What does that mean?
Absolutely. It's pretty funny. And I say it's funny. It's funny, but it's not funny. We learn how to fly, right? So when we have no time in an airplane. So obviously you learn how to fly from hour zero, and you get hour one and two and three, and you start progressing through this thing. And the first thing your flight instructor teaches you, or one of the first things, because you don't taxi without it, is you get the ATIS, right? So you get the ATIS, you're on the field, it's flight A or flight one or flight, what your maiden voyage. Here we go. And we've got the ATIS and we taxi out, blah, blah, blah. Then when you come back to the airport after your first flight, you've done some, power in, power out, all this climbs, turns, descents, and all this other fun stuff that we get to do. Then we come back in and we get the ATIS and we stress the importance of it and we land. Well, that's good in habit development. But as our careers progress and as our flying experience and flying knowledge progresses, we need to understand that ATIS does give us some misinformation. And with TAAs, technically advanced aircraft, we have better information sometimes at our airplane than the ATIS is giving us from 2 miles away on the other side of, the opposite side of an airport next to a wall of hangars that deflects the wind somewhere. So the ATIS at the airplane, if you call it that, or the information the airplane is giving you based on the wind tees and direction and things like that, is instant and live versus the ATIS that you're getting, at the airport. Some of the important things an ATIS can give you, obviously, ceiling and visibility when needed, but really, all you need is an altimeter setting, active runway, and make sure you're landing into a headwind or a tailwind that's not out of limits.
Now, here's sort of what it looks like from the controller side of things. And as a pilot, I kind of understood this, but now that I actually do it each day, I don't know, maybe I'll reveal something that'll help someone here, but it's really not a secret. So the National Weather Service really is who, it's their property. The machine, the ASOS machine that's on the airport, I don't care if it's LAX or my airport or wherever. Some of the other airports have AWOS versus ASOS, and I'm not even going to touch that bee's nest right here. But the ASOS that you're going to see at most airports is a National Weather Service thing. And that automated system pumps information into a public sort of, you can get that information anywhere. You see on the news, they say, well, tonight it's such and such. And it's a lot of times it's an airport because there's a machine at that airport. That's just a nice place to locate one. It makes a lot of sense. But so whether it's your nightly news or your electronic flight bag, like if you're using ForeFlight or whoever, or just aviationweather.gov, you can pull up METARs. All that stuff is public information that's just being automatically fed. And of course, the National Weather Service has all their we'll call them supercomputers, whatever, that make forecast models and take all that information and trends and all that. But all of that information comes up to this little computer screen up in the tower cab. Usually, some airports, like the bigger ones, it may go into a weather service office that's a couple floors down from the tower cab, like where there's a National Weather Service employee who actually takes the weather observation, and then they can input that, and then the DATIS will have all the remarks about the airport, that guy's observation, and so forth, and then the tower controls will just announce it. But at smaller airports like mine, I'm a limited aviation weather observer, so I had to take a National Weather Service test and all that to be able to not only take a weather observation, but to legally be able to sign into that machine and augment it, because as we all know, and as you stated, the machine doesn't always get it right. So that machine is it's an analog passive piece of equipment, or well, many pieces of equipment. There's a whole array of stuff out there. But if I don't like what it says, well, guess what? I log in and change it. And that's why, you see at the end of a METAR, it'll say auto, and sometimes it won't say auto. And we're all taught that means no human intervention if it says auto. And if I don't log into the ASOS in the morning or somebody doesn't and we don't change anything, then it'll just leave that automated if nobody's logged in. And so you know that it's face value, take it with a grain of salt because there could be so many things interfering with it or whatever. It's pretty good at self-diagnosing, and it puts the little dollar sign at the end if it thinks something's broken on it, but you get to guess which thing is broken unless it has the little M for missing. So as a tower controller, every hour, unless something changes significantly, and I will not get into all of the little triggering events that you're supposed to memorize that would make you have to make a specie, but it's all programmed into the machine anyway. And it'll alert us, by the way, if you're logged in, it beeps at you if the criteria for a specie is met and you didn't catch it because you're busy, working aircraft. But that machine, or as we make the ATIS, we take the observation, we add all the pertinent information, the runway in use, construction, things like that. We record it, and that happens at 45 minutes after the hour. You watch it for 2 minutes, so 45 to 47, and then that's your observation window in that 2 minutes, and you take that weather that you observed in the 2 minutes, and you make the ATIS out of it, right? And then if something changes, you make a specie. But in addition to all that other stuff, there are a lot of little changes that can happen that do not actually trigger you to have to make a special weather observation, technically, but that would be very operationally significant, let's just say. So at my airport, I'm only 2.5 miles inland from the shoreline, which is great, but we get the marine layer, especially right now, May gray and June gloom. The marine layer might creep in. The ASOS isn't going to catch it. It's going to say sky clear because more or less right above it, the sky is clear. However, I have a giant wall of fog touching the departure into the runway. So I have to notice that and I have to put that information in. But that could come right over the top of the airport to a scattered to almost broken ceiling, or it could pull back to being few or just clear with a fog bank to the west or mark. And that's going to really affect all of our missed approaches. But technically, going from few to scattered or whatever, unless it goes broken, is not going to trigger a specie. But you're going to care, right? So we have to sit there and watch it and all that. But even that could be up to almost an hour old. So to your point, if you're in a technically advanced aircraft, you can get now just those raw data METARs that are coming out of the system before I've updated the ATIS. And your airplane is also going to give you satellite imagery, probably if you have a subscription for it, radar, and also just the ability to compute its own sort of wind triangle to show you exactly where the wind is coming from, regardless of what the ATIS says, right?
That's correct.
So that was kind of a big, long-winded discussion, but at the same time, that's what goes through my head in that 2 minutes that I make the ATIS, and that I have to sit there and watch in addition to all the other things I got to watch, when we're working. But you have it in your pocket now, if you've just got a smartphone with, ForeFlight or whatever, to get better information than that, right?
Oh, absolutely. And especially, you mentioned something. You mentioned several things in that whole segment right there. And one of the things that you mentioned was you get a specie, and I think people uh, that are initially taught to fly, we don't really, even in the instrument side, um, they're not taught about tempo, special, and becoming. And I know that, from a controller standpoint, from the tower, it's important when you put the ASOS together, or you put, information delta together, and then, you're going to have a tempo, special, becoming, and how that affects other operations other than just Part 91 flying. I think people just look at it and go, well, what the heck is this? And what the heck is that? And, like you said, we have better information at the fingertips sometimes than the ATIS can provide, because we're getting real time data right at the nose of the airplane, what that wind is doing. And more importantly, when you have the runway environment in sight, you also have the wind socks in sight. And people are a lot of times in the general aviation environment concerned about wind, and everybody's concerned about wind. Well, if you're really concerned about wind, you need to look at your airplane and you need to look at the wind socks, because the ATIS probably isn't giving you exactly what the wind is doing. Because people land, how many times have people landed and gone, oh, well, that wind was it was a headwind, and then it gave me a little push to a tailwind. Well, yeah, that's because you're landing on this side of the airport and there's that wall of hangars over there. And the ATIS is on the other side of the airport. Instead of on the east side, it's on the west side where the hangars aren't, and it's about a mile and a half away. So when you're looking at all the things that come together to put that ATIS out there, what you have to do is you have to take it, like you said, with a grain of salt, use it as a snapshot, and then put it together with all of your other tools in order to realize, hey, we just need the altimeter setting in an active runway, and we're good. Then we're concerned about ceiling and visibility. Outside of that, hey, your airplane's going to give you the great information.
Now, how can a professional pilot or an aspiring professional use the equipment in their airplane more to their advantage? Like, what are you thinking when you're, let's just say, bumping down the ILS final and you've got that little wind indicator or something on your PFD? Are you looking at that, or where do you look to find a windsock? What's going through Chad's mind in those last, say, 5 miles before touchdown?
Well, generally speaking, when you're shooting an ILS, and I'll just throw it out there, the wind's not going to be much. It's going to be calm because ILSs are usually the need to shoot an ILS in actual. Let's clarify that, not just some practice random ILS out there, but ILS in actual instrument conditions. More times than not, you're in smooth air. So you're going to be in smooth, quiet air. Okay. And you know how that rolls at your airport. And we know how that rolls on a lot of the coastal cities. I go into Monterey, California quite a bit, and we shoot the ILS into 10 right going into Monterey. If we have to shoot that ILS, it's usually calm because we're coming in on 10 right. Well, where does the rough air come from? It comes from 27, right? It comes from the west. Well, when the air swaps around in that marine layer is sitting there, or it moves in, or it causes the ILS to be used, more times than not, you're looking at it's smooth air. So some of the things that I look at in that last 5 miles of flight is I know the air is probably going to be smooth. I know the wind direction is either going to be uh, down the runway, and it's not going to probably be gusty because the ILS is in effect. So you've got to think in my mind, how many ILSs in my career have I shot when it's 23 gusts and 34? I mean, it comes down to about zero. So that last, I'm just worried about ceiling and visibility. And when I pop out of the clouds, I'm looking for a windsock or a wind tee. And when I say windsock or wind tee, I'll look down at the wind tee in the airplane on the PFD slash MFD screen, depending on what I'm in and what kind of avionics I'm working with, whether it's Honeywell, Garmin, or Collins. And then I'll look up at the windsock, which gives me the real time data right next to the runway there of actually what the wind's doing at that point. So those things I'm definitely looking for, and I'm not looking for much else.
Yeah. A final little thought on this. I get all the time wind check, hey, tower, wind check, things like that. And that's, it's okay. I don't mind, especially when it's real gusty. I mean, if it's real gusty, I try to give a wind check to every aircraft that's on short final anyway. But sometimes I really have to bite my tongue and resist the urge to say something like, can I direct your attention to the gigantic orange windsock that's uncoincidentally placed immediately adjacent to the touchdown zone? It's not a coincidence that there are usually windsocks placed right abeam the touchdown zone, probably usually across from the PAPIs or something like that. I mean, there's no exact convention for it that I know of, but they're right there so that as you pop out or you're on short final and you're looking at your PAPIs, you're looking at your runway sight picture, there's probably going to be a windsock right in there somewhere. And at my airport, in both cases, whichever direction you're landing, 2, 4, or 6, there's going to be one just on the right side there.
Exactly. And I think this is kind of one area where we can improve in the CFI community when we're teaching the GA drivers, the majority of the GA drivers and the owner flown drivers and a lot of professionals too, is that, hey, look, folks, we've got ground based things like windsocks that are, you could say a windsock goes back to pen and paper because we've got everything on an iPad now, but the windsock is a pen and paper version of what our wind is really doing. And we know that if pen and paper doesn't necessarily fail, but the battery in our iPad can go out and we can lose that approach plate on the iPad because our battery went out, or we spilled coffee on it, or something that happens in general aviation in an airplane and things like that. So I think it's really important, and I try to stress this to everyone that I fly with, exactly what we're talking about. Hey, look at your PFD screen, look at your wind tees, look at your MFD screen, wherever those wind tees may be. That's your instant readout. Look at the wind socks on the airport and look down the field, and that's what you're going to experience as you go down the runway.
And to, the point of flying an ILS in actual conditions, and you're talking about whether it's smooth or not and so forth, especially in the coastal airports, as you discussed, like Monterey or my airport, when you go through a marine layer like that, it's usually a pretty smooth top and usually a pretty smooth set of bases too. Sometimes they're a little more ragged, especially as it starts burning off. And of course, it's a little bit lower towards the water and sort of gains altitude as you go inland. But I see a lot of students, IFR and otherwise even, that are sometimes really surprised that they're going to get a wind shift halfway down the ILS that's going to require probably a power change as well. And, we make, of course, small glide slope corrections and heading changes, whether using the bracketing techniques or whatever, or even just watching the autopilot do it. We do all those things in tiny increments, but sometimes it's not enough. And you're saying, hey, look, I need to add power, or wow, that little wind correction angle I had before isn't working anymore. And it's always right as you go into or come out of the clouds. And I kind of chuckle a little bit because by definition, because of that, there will be a temperature and probably wind change as you go into or out of the clouds, like by definition, right? That's why the clouds are where they are. So you can keep that in mind. And if you have a technically advanced aircraft with something like that on the PFD that's figuring out that little wind vector angle, it's going to help you really figure that out. And you can kind of take a glance at it, like as you go into or out of the clouds, it's going to figure it out really quickly that there's been a wind shift, and then you can sort of use that little bit of information to figure out, hey, I'm going to need to add a little more right wind correction angle or left, or I may have to reduce some power here or something like that based on how the wind is going to change. But then once you do pop out, you're right, the windsock is as analog as it gets. There's no electronics except for, of course, the light that's in it so you can see it at night. There's no information that needs to be transferred to anywhere, uploaded or downloaded or anything. It's just wind physically blowing through a tube, and what you see is what you get, perfectly up to date.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think we've beaten that one to death. So now here's a fun one. You've noticed that, well, actually, a lot of people have noticed that their right main sometimes, or the tire at least, wears out faster than the left one. What is up with that?
Oh, wow. That's good. That's good. Well, it's not because you're riding that right brake, I'll tell you that much. So, right main wearing out faster than the left main. We see that a lot, especially down in these latitudes, and down in the Dallas latitude, and even up through the mid part of the country where the prevailing wind is always going to be out of the south, right? So you're always going to be using the 1.5s, the 1.3s, the 1.4s, the 1.6s, all that kind of stuff on the runway direction when you're landing. Well, shoot, that airflow pattern usually goes from west to east. All right. So if you're using the ones and you're heading south, it's hitting you from the right side. So what wheel comes down first if you're landing properly? The right main. So therefore, the right main takes all the weight and it gets going first. And then after the airplane is getting its drag from the right main, the drag, obviously induced from slowing down the airplane as it's touching another surface, which in this case is the runway with the wheel. Then you set your left main down and it gets a little easier set down on the left side. And then the left main takes a little bit less. So the right main takes a whole lot of wear. And then the left main wears a whole lot less. And it's the exact opposite if you're going to be using the threes, 3.5s all the time, and 3.6s and 3.1s and things like that. Then you're going to wear out that left main. But since prevailing comes up from the south normally, and then the pattern goes from west to east, our right main goes first.
All right, then. Learn something new every day.
And that's why we're here.
So as people who listen to the show move up from pistons to jets and so forth, we all talk about the engineering way of saying it is energy management, right? You got drag, you got power, you got a whole lot less drag and a whole lot more power as you get into jets and turboprops and things like that. But you need to manage that in a completely different way, not only because engines react differently, but because you have speed limitations and complexity and a whole bunch of other stuff here. But how do you manage drag, for instance, before you drop in a descent?
Well, one of the things that I see also is, I want to say, poor energy management, but I don't want it to come out that way. And that's kind of how it is. But I see energy not managed properly. And the first thing we do is we have a busy set of airspace and we're brought in high because we're going into an airport where, let's say, the main traffic out is at 2,000, the main traffic in is at 2,500 feet. So that keeps everything separated, no matter what. And then you're sitting at 2,500 because you're an inbound, and they say, okay, well, maintain 2.5 until you're told to descend, right? Well, you may be told to descend late and you may be left high. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's how we manage it that makes it, you could say, not correct, or our etiquette is a little off. And a lot of times, what I see, especially in the teaching environment, is people find themselves high and they would just want to push the nose over. Well, they haven't configured the airplane yet. Well, in certain airplanes, what do you get when you're clean and you push the nose over? You get a ball rolling down a hill. What does the ball rolling down a hill do? I don't care if your power's at idle or your power's in. Ball rolling down a hill picks up speed. Well, if you're not configured, you can't get that way because you're probably going to be over a flap and gear setting. So if you're over a flap and gear speed or setting or speed to get that, whatever drag you need in, okay, and your plane doesn't have something like speed brakes on it, and even if it does, so what I usually do is I usually say drag before you drop. And what that means, or what I'm meaning by my phraseology in drag before you drop, is you need to slow down and configure before you go down. Because if you do that, then you can be speed under control and power under control. If you don't do that, then you're going to be out of control and you're not going to slow down. And your chances for something like a go around, or even worse than a go around, because the go arounds are not a bad thing. A go around means, hey, I didn't want to make a bad situation worse, so we went around. But when you're trying to not go around, okay, which can be a really not a good thing at all, and you try to make something bad, or a bad situation, work into a good situation, you can really have an accident or an incident trying to get your plane out of the sky. When you're coming over the numbers and you're not configured, you destabilize on short final, because normally you'd have your full flaps in, but you didn't slow down till you were in a quarter mile final, et cetera, et cetera. So then you pop in the flaps, and now you're pushing the nose over because the airplane wants to rise, and this and that. So if you drag before you drop and you configure the airplane, slow down, then you can go down. You can make one of those situations look absolutely perfect, when due to air traffic and things like that, you were left a little higher than normal and then had to descend into an airport.
Yeah, always blame the controller, right, man?
No, you know what? Absolutely not. The controller's doing the airspace stuff, and and it's the pilot's fault for not knowing how to manage the situation.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's always a little give and take with the guessing game there because, ideally, if there was no other traffic, no nothing, you could compute from your cruise altitude pretty much exactly where to pull the power to idle and just let it coast all the way down, add the flaps, add the gear, all that. And, save for maybe a tiny wind change here or there, you'd probably barely have to reapply. But of course, we have terrain, we have other traffic, we have letters of agreement between facilities and all kinds of complexity that gets thrown in there to the point where we're all kind of trying to guess the other person's next move, and sometimes we just don't guess it right, or someone just throws a wrench in the gearbox and like a VFR airplane crossing the final at 2,000 feet or whatever, and not talking to anyone, and there's just nothing we can do about it. But yeah, in general, yeah, energy management is really difficult, and yeah, it's kind of one place where turboprops get to shine a little bit because you can pretty much always pull the power and descend, whereas in the Challenger and the 10, not so much.
That's right. And and even in the turboprops, I mean, you think about it, in flying a TBM, if you want to put in full flaps, it's 122 knots. And you got to get that thing below 122. Well, if you only have gear and flaps one end and you're pushing that nose over, even if your power's at idle, if you're high, you're going to have a problem getting that thing below 122. So you can even get full flaps in that aircraft. And then if you take the M600, for example, that's going to be 112 knots on full flaps. Well, if you're not, below 112 knots, that takes a lot. And if you just have flaps one and gear down even if you have power to idle, if you don't lift that nose up and stop your descent, or get it down to a really slow descent, you have a really hard time getting it below 112 knots just to put that nose forward. And I'm not talking about professionals like you and I, Brandon, that have some of this nice single engine turboprop experience. When you're a non-professional driver and you're early in your career, you have 6, 7, 800, 1,000 hours. You just either A, don't have the experience that it took to get it there, or B, uh, you you have a lack of experience in the instruction department with the CFI that was teaching you how to fly, so you didn't get the energy management knowledge you needed when you went through initial in your TBM or your M600 or your or whatever else you happen to be flying at the time. So it's exponentially important or difficult. And I remember where I was when I was learning how to fly, and how difficult energy management was for me. But as soon as I figured out, hey, and it was pretty early on because I've always been a CFI and I've always taught, that, hey, if you drag before you drop, you're going to have a much easier time getting to the runway, getting on PAPI, hitting 1,000 foot markers like you're supposed to, or minus 250 plus 500 like you need to, versus trying to do it the opposite way, which is push the nose over when you're clean, and then you're never going to slow down. So, even in that single engine turboprop environment, even though that blade flattens out for you and acts as a speed brake, it doesn't always work out how we want it to. In things like that, especially in some of these airplanes without speed brakes.
All right, all right. I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to break this into 2 episodes. If you're still here, you're awesome. And I almost feel bad for doing this, but there's still almost another full hour of Chad and I talking about this stuff. So we're going to leave that to look forward to for next time. If you have any questions or comments on what you've heard so far, though, I can't wait to hear from you. So make sure to shoot me an email, brandon@podcastingonaplane.com. Or better yet, use your smartphone or the SpeakPipe widget that pops up when you visit podcastingonaplane.com and record me something. And who knows, maybe it'll even end up on the show. While you're on the website, though, maybe consider supporting the show, too. If you're getting value from it, I really appreciate having you on board as a patron. You get episodes early and sometimes some other stuff, too. Or if you're not into the recurring thing, I get it. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/Bravo Golf spelled out and do a one-time thing in increments of just $3. If you want to stay sharp on the mic, make sure to use the affiliate code DELTA at plainenglishsim.com and you can get 10% off the best smartphone-based ATC simulator around. And there's, of course, a link in the show notes. And as always, I thank you so much for your support in whatever form it takes and for listening to the show and passing the word along about this or really any of your favorite aviation podcasts to a friend. It's a crazy world out there right now, and as we roll on into the unknown future, I want to make sure that despite all the constant gloom and stress caused by everything happening, that we remember that we still have a lot of power to affect what comes next. So please, till next time, make good choices, fly safe, fly right, and most importantly, stay healthy. That's all for now. Your frequency changes approved until next time, and report back on this frequency for the next episode. Good day.
Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. Brandon's comments and those of his guests, the website's content and any of the social media, etc., are not part of his official responsibility as a controller or as an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are his, and those of his guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. Also, while he's a CFI, he's not acting as your CFI, nor is he your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie and fun, but is in no way, shape or form professional advice or legal counsel. If you're in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.